Hey, what's up, guys? CM Tears here, back with another video. I know it's been a while. I've been taking a break, but I'm finally back with another tier list. I kind of wanted to get back into making tier lists with something that I feel passionate about. I know it's kind of random. I've been doing mostly like media tier lists, and now I'm getting into something different. I kind of want to do that. I kind of want to branch out. I want to do like different things. I don't want this to just be one secular channel. I want this to be a secular channel. So this tier list is of the United States presidents who I feel like I'm a very passionate person when it comes to American history, specifically presidents. I know a lot about most of these presidents. There are some that I'm not really educated on. And before I made this video, I did some research on them. I gotta be honest, some of them are just not, there's just not a whole lot to talk about, but I will do my best. So these are the tiers here: creme de la creme, best of the best, and then worst of the worst. Speaks for itself. Died too early in recency bias, for presidents that I feel like we just can't rank because their terms were so recent that we don't really know the full effect of what they did. Um, so yeah, I'm going to be ranking them based on how they were for the State of the Union and for our country as a whole. Um, how their policies affected us domestically, internationally, economically, politically, etc. How they affected the executive office, how they affected the other branches of government, how they interacted with those branches of government. I'm not going to be looking at popularity. I've seen a lot of tier lists on the internet rank presidents with popularity in mind, and I don't really understand that at all. Popularity of a president during their term does not matter because we've seen how it changes over time. So I'm gonna ignore that 100%. Um, Also, I'm not ranking them based on how they were as people, right? I think a lot of people try to keep them interchangeable. Like I've seen people rank um, some presidents lower because they were racist or misogynist. Well, I have a strong feeling that pretty much every president on this list, or pre-modern president on this list, was racist or misogynistic or a mix of the two, or at least had something about them that, by today's standards, um, is not good. So that would just be kind of defeatist to rank them that way. Um, but obviously, there are going to be some exceptions because some of these people are just really bad, and their personality reflects their presidency. So anyway, let's get into our first president, which was George Washington. Um, Beyond simply leading our country through the Revolutionary War, which happened prior to his presidency, I know, um, he is responsible for the creation of our government. And I don't really think there's much doubt. There's nothing to say about that. He created the cabinet system, the power to veto in the executive branch, the federal court system, the national bank. He demonstrated the power of the federal government to enforce laws, like with the Whiskey Rebellion. He pretty much defined what it meant to be in office, right? And I know that some presidents will change that in the future a little bit, but he set an example, right? Like with the two-term limit, he was honorable. He stepped down. I think I also have a great admiration for Washington because there are so many people that would have been president and would have been a despot. They wouldn't have encouraged democratic thought. Washington was a thinker of a free thinker. He believed in democratic ideals, and that he's one of the reasons why our union was democratic. I have a lot of um, admiration for Washington. So he's definitely in creme de la creme. Okay, so John Adams is next. So John Adams is not my favorite president. I do not like John Adams a whole lot. As a person, he was kind of a dick. Um, but on a policy level, he signed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which are horrible. They're bad. So, for those of you who aren't aware, the Alien Acts pretty much increased the residency requirement for citizenship, and it allowed the executive branch to deport or imprison foreigners deemed dangerous. And what happened is, oftentimes people were deported for literally no reason at all. They were just deported with the assumption that they um, were dangerous, and a lot of people were falsely deported. And The fact that there would even be a power for that is honestly quite frightening. He kind of took Washington's ideals and kind of just took a piss. I'm not a big fan of Adams. Uh, to be fair, I'm gonna give him some credit where credit's due. He did avoid conflict with war in the XYZ conflict. Sorry, he avoided conflict with France in the XYZ conflict. Um, and he did build up the U.S. Navy in the Great Lakes region. Um, but beyond that, he also was there during the recession of the early 1800s. The economy wasn't doing very well. To say that was just Adams' fault solely is kind of ignorant um, to other factors at the time. But I am of the belief that Adams didn't really do much to stop it. So I'm going to keep him in just all right. He could be in mid easily, but I'm going to keep him here for now. Jefferson. So Jefferson is another president where whew, he is not a good person in my opinion, but he was a decent president. He was decent enough at least. So first of all, Louisiana Purchase, right? He purchases land that pretty much doubles the size of our country, um, and he lowers our national debt. But he did so without congressional approval, and that is not something that I take lightly. Again, it's just another example of the executive branch abusing powers. Um, Personally, I don't really have a lot of admiration for him. He did establish judicial review. I feel like some of his financial policies were really good, with the exception of obviously the Embargo Act of 1807, which was horrible. Um, he was pretty middle of the road, but he did expand our borders significantly. And honestly, for that, I do have to just say that was good. That was good. He recognized a good deal and he took it. Um, so I'm going to just give him that. So Madison, James Madison. Um, so Madison is president during the War of 1812. I really, you can blame him for that. I don't really hold it against him a lot. It was a hard time for America, and he was a good leader. He had a lot of strengths that I think he used during the war. I think he was actually, he was a pretty decent leader, but some of his policies were a little lackluster. He was also slow acting at times. For instance, he was slow to remove John Armstrong, who was Secretary of War at the time. Armstrong was not a very competent person, especially at the time. We needed someone different, and Madison definitely was slow to remove him. Outside of the War of 1812, though, he did strengthen the federal government quite a bit, including the National Bank. So I will give him credit where credit's due. I think the economy was, aside from the obvious turmoil of War of 1812, it was not as bad as it could have been. So I do give him credit where credit is due. I think Madison was pretty good, or good. He was good. So next is Monroe. Now, Monroe introduces the Monroe Doctrine, which isn't actually implemented until Quincy following Monroe. I'm going to talk a little bit about the doctrine. The doctrine, in my opinion, is overblown. At the time, there wasn't a single European colonial power that took it seriously, right? European countries pretty much saw it as America being kind of just way too territorial for its own good. They didn't have the power to really influence or enforce the Monroe Doctrine, and nobody really cared. It wasn't until Teddy Roosevelt dug it up that it actually was a big deal. Teddy Roosevelt pretty much dug up the Monroe Doctrine and claimed that it was this long-lasting legislation that should be honored. And so that's when it really becomes important. But at the time, it was not a big deal. So I'm not going to give him a lot of points for that. That being said, though, he supported the Missouri Compromise, and he was generally a good resolver of tensions between the North and the South, and I'm going to give him points for that. He was key in acquiring Florida, but the Seminole War empowered Jackson, who I think is one of the worst presidents, and we're going to get into him in a second. Then again, though, does Monroe deserve criticism for empowering Jackson? Was that really his intention? I'm not going to look at that in hindsight, so I'm not going to, diss Monroe for that. I'm going to move Adams down to mid, by the way, and I'm actually just going to put Jefferson in just... no. I like this. I'm gonna put Monroe in just all right, though. I'm gonna put him in just all right. Okay, so Jackson is terrible. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. Next is John Quincy Adams. Sorry. So Quincy expanded trade, and he was good at foreign policy in the Americas. Um, I actually did a lot of research on Quincy before this video, and I gotta say there's not really a lot to say about him. I will give him points though. He did fight the expansion of slavery. He wasn't content with the status quo, which is what we're gonna see with many other presidents coming up. So I'm gonna give him points for that. He wasn't content, but there wasn't really a lot that he did that I can put him up above just all right. So I'm gonna just keep him there. Then we go to Jackson, who is just terrible. He might actually be worst of the worst, but we're not gonna put him there until I know for sure who's here and who's here. We're gonna wait a little bit. So first of all, the Indian Removal Act, which by today's standards is horrible, and even then it was considered horrible. It also wasn't constitutional, in my opinion. It's up to debate if it was, but I believe it wasn't. And it also legally it went against Worcester versus Georgia. So he did not follow the Constitution with that, and it led to the Trail of Tears, one of the worst, most brutal points in American history. He was not sympathetic to the natives at all. There was also a period of economic instability while Jackson was president, which people kind of overlook, especially conservatives, because they like to point out that he did pay off the national debt, which is true, but I feel like that's overblown a little bit. He was very expansionist, and he also introduced the spoil system, which is horrible. It's pretty much just cronyism, giving jobs to people that you want in power. There is no merit involved whatsoever. And he also opposed abolitionist efforts, so he did not do much to stop he did not do much to cog the wheel that was tensions between North and South, which eventually would turn into the Civil War. So he was terrible. Might be in worst of the worst, but we're not sure yet. I'm gonna wait a little bit. Okay, Van Buren. Van Buren's not bad. He's not a bad president. I think he's pretty mid. There's not really a lot to talk about with him. The Panic of 1837 for one, and the Indian Removal Act, as well. So the Indian Removal Act starts with Jackson, but a lot of it takes place under Buren, and Buren doesn't do anything to stop it. He actually continues it, and it's very bad under Buren. A lot of the atrocities that we see happen under Buren. Am I going to hold that against him? Yeah, a little bit, because it wasn't constitutional, but he didn't start it, so there's that. He also opposed pretty much any direct federal intervention, and he cut back government spending significantly. I really don't have sympathy for Buren, but I also, gosh, I'm gonna just keep him in just all right. He could go down to mid. I don't think he was a bad president. I don't think he was on the same level as Adams, or Jackson, but he's just all right. Okay, so next is William Henry Harrison, who only was in office for 31 days. He most likely died of contaminated water, so cholera. We don't know for sure, but he wasn't in office to do much, so he's going there. Okay, so next is Tyler. So Tyler settled the main dispute. He strengthened the presidency quite a bit, but he also increased sectional cleavage between the North and the South over the slavery issue, and that obviously leads to civil war. Now, is it exclusively him? No, but he's part of a chain of presidents that just kick the can of slavery down the road, and he doesn't do much to stop it at all. And he's honestly, for me, he's just going in mid, or bad, honestly. He's going in mid because there are presidents that I feel did worse than him. Nah, he's going in bad. He's going in bad. I don't have sympathy for him at all, to be honest with you. Okay. So after Tyler's Polk. Polk is actually a really good president, in my opinion. He is pretty good. So he starts the Mexican-American War, which was illegal, by the way. From a moral standpoint, Polk had no authority. There was no legal reason to go to war with Mexico. He made all that up, and it was purely for imperialistic, expansionist reasons. But he did expand our borders, and this isn't a popularity contest. This isn't, their morals. This is how they were for the Union, and he was pretty good for the Union. He expanded our borders. I don't. I'm gonna put him in pretty good for now, but he could go in good, right? He also settled the Oregon boundary dispute with Britain, Canada. So Oregon and Washington were claimed. So for his expansion of our country, I have to give him credit. Polk goes in pretty good. Okay, Zachary Taylor's next. So Taylor was only in office for about a year, and I am inclined to put him in died too early. But again, a lot can happen in a year. It's just not a lot happened with his Taylor. He opposed expansion of slavery, and he actually personally threatened to go down into the South and put down any rebellion that might occur, which is crazy because that is something that we haven't heard from a single president in the United States thus far. I feel like if Taylor hadn't died so early, he could have actually been a really good president. He could have been effective, and I do have a lot of sympathy for him. But he did die only after 1 year, and his threats were only threats, right? He didn't have time to actually do anything. So I'm just going to put him in there. So Millard Fillmore is next. I do not like Millard Fillmore. He was a bad president. The Compromise of 1850, which only kicked the can down the road, introduced popular sovereignty, which pretty much meant the issue of slavery was voted on by residents of a state instead of, if a state was already free or a slave state, right? So now people voted on it, and that caused a lot of tension. He introduced the Fugitive Slave Act, which is very, very bad. So pretty much the common man had to report and turn in slaves to local authorities or face prosecution, whether you were in the South or the North, and a lot of people hated that. It was a bad act. Okay, it was bad. And also, I'm not just talking about it from a hindsight perspective, today we consider that really bad. People back then, there were a lot of people that had issues with that. And so that alone tells me it was not popular and it was a bad act. So he's going in bad. As far as foreign relations go, though, he did open up Japan. And he did restore relations with Mexico, but I'm sorry. Domestically speaking, he was just not a good president. He was not what we needed. Okay, so Franklin Pierce is next. So he was terrible. I do not like Franklin Pierce. So we have the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which pretty much repealed the Missouri Compromise, which had prohibited slavery in abolitionist states. Now territories could decide based on popular sovereignty, like we saw under Fillmore. And so this leads to Bleeding Kansas, one of the most violent turmoil periods ever. It was horrible, and he did little to stop that. He literally kicked the can down the road. He did not care about the issue at all. Tensions only increased under him. That's it. The only other notable thing he did was the Gadsden Purchase, which, he acquired a small amount of land in the Southwest. But that's nothing to write home about. He was just terrible. I don't know if he's Jackson level, though, to be honest with you. I think he was just bad. I'm also going to put Tyler in mid because I don't think he was as bad as Millard or Pierce. And there's Buchanan. Buchanan is just the worst. Now, I'm going to start off by saying, is the Civil War because of Buchanan? No, I don't think so. I also don't know if Buchanan could have actually stopped the Civil War, but I certainly know he did not help it, okay? Buchanan believed in states' rights, minimal federal intervention, and he supported the Dred Scott decision, which denied citizenship to enslaved and free black people. And he took pretty much no action to prevent secession. So tensions increased tenfold under Buchanan. The succession of the southern states begins with Buchanan's end of Buchanan's presidency. He doesn't do anything to stop it. The writing is on the wall, but he's just kind of a content with the status quo president, which is just horrible. I think he was bad. He was a bad president. He was bad. Then we go to Lincoln. Lincoln is S tier in my opinion, or creme de la creme. He's better than Washington, and I don't think there's much debate about that. So beyond simply his leadership during the Civil War, which was amazing, with the exception of the early 2 years where he was slow to remove generals and officers who were not up to code. Um, he was having problems on the front lines, but eventually he did get the right people in charge. Um, but um, beyond his wartime leadership, the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment rise him above all of the previous presidents because he solved the issues that no one else seemed to get through their heads, um, while keeping the Union intact at a time of our country's greatest turmoil. He led us through that. I mean, he was amazing. He also encouraged westward economic development, like the Homestead Act. He was good domestically. He was just an amazing president. Okay, and I find it hard even finding something bad to say about him, even though there were things that were questionable. Um, he was a good president and an amazing human being. He's going in creme de la creme, no question there. And then following Lincoln is quite possibly one of the worst presidents ever. That's Andrew Johnson. I hate Johnson with a passion. I think he was terrible. Um, it sucks that he was the one that had to precede Lincoln. Lincoln is this amazing genius of a person, and then he's followed up by like the worst president ever. Not the worst. I don't know if he's the worst ever. We'll figure that out. But he was pretty bad. Johnson, like hastily, like instantly after the Civil War, tried to reintegrate the South. Um, he did not encourage any sort of Reconstruction. He issued thousands of pardons to the Southern elite, wealthy war criminals, um, traitors. All of these people who should not be pardoned were pardoned under Johnson because he was sympathetic to them. He also allowed black codes to exist in the South, which are pretty much an early version of Jim Crow laws. So horrible. He vetoed several bills, which include the Freedmen's Bureau Bill and the Civil Rights Act of 1866. So Johnson was terrible. He was a horrible president. He is a lot of the reason why the KKK and hate groups in the South rise. He doesn't do much to stop them. He literally just sits by while people are getting lynched by mobs of hundreds of people in the South. He was terrible. The only bright spot is that he bought Alaska from Russia. That doesn't give him any points in my opinion. I mean, yeah, he expanded our borders, but the dude was he was not in the right mind. He was bad. He was worst of the worst. Following him is one of my favorite presidents of all time, and that's going to be Grant. Grant is going in amazing. I don't really think there might be some debate there, right? And I'll get into that in a second. But Grant was a huge advocate of Reconstruction. Oh, I should also mention before, Johnson is the first president to get impeached, for good reason. The dude was terrible. So yeah, I hate Johnson. I hate Johnson. So anyway, getting back to Grant. Um, so Grant was a big fan of Reconstruction. He believed that the southern states needed to be occupied federally so that the rights of freedmen could be ensured, and that a new reign of liberty could begin in the South finally. Um, he implemented the 15th Amendment finally after Lincoln. He suppressed the KKK and other hate groups, oversaw the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. He vetoed an inflation bill, moved us into the gold standard, and created our first national park. Among a list of things that he did, he was amazing. Now let's talk about the other side of his presidency, the Panic of 1873, and he was also presiding over several corruption scandals. I say presiding because I do not blame Grant for these scandals. I think it was his cabinet, right? I don't think he had any idea what was going on. I think he was too loyal and trusting of a person. I feel like he allowed his cabinet to take advantage of him, and it's sad because he was such a good president. If he had a good cabinet, I'm confident that these scandals would not have happened. But things like the whiskey ring really hurt his reputation, and it hurt his ability to get things done. Um, but I do like Grant as a president. I think his presidency was good, and one of the great tragedies of the Grant administration is that the Reconstruction era ends with Grant, and that's horrible. And then we get into Hayes, who I don't really have much to say about other than he ended Reconstruction. That's bad enough. The writing was on the wall. Reconstruction needed to continue, and Hayes didn't disregarded that, and he ended Reconstruction right away, which we've seen has had irreparable damage on the South throughout the Gilded Age and into the modern era. Um, yeah, Hayes was just not a good president. He was not in the right mind. No. Um, so next is Chester MacArthur. So Chester is actually a pretty good president. I think he was pretty good. I'm gonna put him in good. So he ended the spoils system. Like I said, that was pretty much his cronyism. And with the Pendleton Act, he modernized the U.S. Navy. On the downside, he did sign the Chinese Exclusion Act, a revised version, mind you, but it was still an Exclusion Act. And he did sign the first general immigration law, which I do feel was necessary at the time. Um, but I feel like he was actually a pretty decent president. His economic policies were not horrible. He was a competent person. He gets a little overlooked because people assume that Gilded Age presidents were just corrupt and self-serving and kind of, they didn't care for the common man. But I think Chester was actually a pretty good president, so I'm gonna put him in good. So then we get into James Garfield, who died too early. He was only in office for like 6 months, I believe, 5 months. He has the second shortest term of any president, and he really didn't get to do anything. Which, yeah. Um, okay, after Garfield is Cleveland. So Cleveland, the Interstate Commerce Act, the Dawes Act to assimilate the Indians, which the Dawes Act is actually really like I think it was terrible. It created mistrust amongst the Indians and revved up much of their land just to do little to improve their quality of life. Like this dude literally stole land under the natives in the guise of improving their life, and then the natives actually ended up decreasing in general quality of life. This dude swindled them royally, right? And that's horrible. It's horrible for the people, right? For the natives. He vetoes pension bills, and he vetoes Texas drought relief. He vetoes a lot of stuff. If I remember correctly, he actually is the president that vetoes the most. I don't quote me on that. I think he was. Um, but yeah, this guy was not a big fan of federal intervention. Um, I'm not a big fan of him. I think he wasn't the president that we needed at the time. And he definitely is where a lot of the stereotype comes in with Gilded Age corruption. I feel like he is a big proponent of that. So he was honestly pretty mid. Or he's going in just all right. He was going in just all right. Next is Benjamin Harrison, who was only president for 4 years. Also, I should say, Cleveland is the only president to serve 2 terms consecutively. So it goes Cleveland, then Benjamin Harrison, and then Cleveland again. But what I surmise of Cleveland is pretty much what happens in both terms. So there's not really a whole lot to talk about with Harrison. The Sherman Antitrust Act aimed at regulating monopolies, but it wasn't very effective. And he just wasn't an effective president, right? He was kind of a middle of the road, forgettable president. He didn't do a whole lot. And there's not really much that I can say for him. He was just kind of a mid president. Yeah. So McKinley's next. So I have quite a bit to say about McKinley. I don't think he was terrible. So first of all, Spanish American War, was probably completely faked so that we could go to war with Spain and take Cuba. And then there was the Filipino War, which some of the worst atrocities in American history occurred in the Philippines during that war. Like I think of all the American wars combined, all of those atrocities in those wars combined do not match up with what we did in the Philippines. That was not necessary at all. But I am of the belief that McKinley did not truly believe or did not truly know what was going on then. But he didn't do much. He didn't do anything to stop it. He was definitely a Christian imperialist. I feel like he had ideas that were superior. He had a superiority complex. American exceptionalism. He was at the time. The nation was like on the cusp of restoring balance. See, the Gilded Age had a ton of excess, and a lot of people had taken advantage of the country's economy. And in the McKinley era, we could have brought balance back to the economy and to the politics in the U.S. But he was not a he was not the president that we needed to do that. He was very content with the status quo, and I feel like a lot of what Teddy Roosevelt does in after McKinley is a reflection of what McKinley should have done and didn't do. So McKinley is a mid president. I've seen a lot of people try to say McKinley was pretty good, but other than his expansion of territory, which was good for the U.S., um, he was just a mid president, you know? So Teddy Roosevelt is next, and he is my personal favorite president of all time. I think he's a goat. He's going at an amazing. He's not in creme de la creme though, because you know he wasn't challenged. You know, to be in creme de la creme, you have to have been a president that was challenged and succeeded. Okay, Washington was the first president. He created our government, and Lincoln, Civil War, right? Teddy Roosevelt, as much as I'd love to put him up here, he wasn't challenged like that. You know, he was merely a great president during his time. There wasn't a great, um, injustice that was occurring. But you know, he regulated big businesses. He protected consumers. He was a big populist. He pursued antitrust actions against monopolies. He actually got the nickname the Trust Buster. He greatly expanded the national park system, protected millions of acres of public land. What else? He created the FDA at the time. Um, uh, the food, drug, water, resources, etc. in the United States were very, very, very um, not. They were very deregulated, right? Nobody really paid attention to that. There were people dying of contaminated food like every day. Like people were eating bad food every day and dying. Like conditions in factories were horrible. And Teddy Roosevelt changes a lot of that. He actually implements regulation, a lot of workers' rights. He was our first progressive president. Um, on several occasions, this is a fun fact. He actually used the military to protect blacks from white mobs, and he is actually one of the first presidents to do so, since Grant. So he was a big believer in the federal government being used accordingly. Um, what else? The Panama Canal. You can say that the Panama Canal was imperialist, but at the time it was amazing. Um, I mean, it allowed us to tap into our economy in ways we hadn't done before. I mean, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans was huge. Um, and then obviously he built up the U.S. Navy massively. He was the founder of the Big Stick diplomacy. He was an imperialist. But as far as a president goes, for our people and for our country, he was amazing, and I really find a hard time disagreeing with that at all. Right? He was an amazing president. So next is Taft. Taft is a reflection of Teddy, but he's more conservative. I'm a fan of Taft. Don't get me wrong. But he kind of he's just a little bit of a disappointment for me. I feel like he spent a lot of his time trying to live up to expectations, and he didn't really find a path for himself. I do give him credit though; he did expand the merit system. Cronyism was at like an all-time low at this time, um, so I give Taft where credit's due. He could have done more. I do feel like Teddy Roosevelt ego tripped a lot, um, and a lot of other things kind of hindered Taft's ability to um, exert executive power. But I'm gonna put him in good. I think he was a decent president. Okay, Wilson is next. So the big question is, where do I put Woodrow Wilson? Do I put him in worst of the worst, or do I put him in pretty good? Um, so I've seen a lot of tier lists out there who claim Wilson was, the worst president of all time, terrible, horrible. As a human being, he was not good. Okay, he was a racist. He was misogynistic. Um, he literally went against a lot of his own words, like when he said he wanted to stay out of World War One. Immediately gets us into World War One when he um, gets reelected his second term. Um, but to give credit's due, he was a progressive. He had several progressive reforms, like the Federal Reserve Act, the Clayton Antitrust Act, the Free Trade Commission. Um, he did enter into World War One, which you can say was bad. I think at the time it was bad because when we look at it, it's easy to look at it from hindsight and say, oh, well, it was good to enter it because we won. Well, at the time, we didn't know if we were going to win or not, right? So it was kind of a gamble, and I don't know if he should have taken that gamble. Um, but I'm not going to really diss him a lot on that. That's up to debate. He did have influence on the Treaty of Versailles with his 14 points, but it wasn't enough. He also did promote segregation. He did. Uh, and obviously, the big one is the Espionage and Sedition Act, which is terrible. I dissed John Adams for this earlier, and the only reason John Adams is in mid is because there were things that he did that were good that kind of counteracted it. But Wilson is just, there's just a list of things that he did that were just bad, and that I can't really look over. Not to mention, in the later half of his presidency, the dude's wife was literally in charge. Like, Wilson was like a recluse, and his wife Edith was pretty much just signing all the executive orders herself. So she was pretty much our first female president, if you ask me. Wilson was not good. I think he's in terrible. I do think his handling of World War I was good. He had good reforms, but he just wasn't a good president overall. Okay, Harding is next. Lots of scandals, lots and lots of scandals, like the Teapot Dome. He was a very corrupt administration, but he was anti-segregation, and I want to give him points for this. He pardoned hundreds of people that were jailed under the Sedition Act. He understood a lot of the faults of Wilson's regime, and actually tried to change. He actually tried to change a lot of what Wilson had done to the country, and I do give him points for that. I think Harding gets a lot of slack because of how corrupt his presidency was overall. He's just going to go in just all right. Some people might want to put him higher or lower, but I feel like it's a fitting place for him. So next is Coolidge, Silent Cal. A lot of conservatives love Coolidge to be in like the top tier, amazing. I've seen a lot of people actually put him with Washington and Lincoln. The truth is, I don't really think a lot of what happened during his presidency is attributed to him, but rather just the times. It was a roaring 20s. He was pro-business and laissez-faire. He was a huge advocate for the laissez-faire system of economics. Strong advocate for equality. I do want to say he didn't give a lot of attention to farmers in the Midwest, and I think revisionist historians are starting to realize that a possibility of the reason why the Dust Bowl was so bad later in the 1930s is because Coolidge and Hoover, which we'll get into, didn't really give a lot of attention to struggling farmers, but I'm not going to hold it against him. During his presidency, the economy boomed crazy. It was a crazy large economy. Is that because of Coolidge, or is that because is that just something that is going to happen anyway? How much of an effect did Coolidge have on the Great Depression? I think he did have some effect on it, but I'm not going to hold a lot against him. He was pretty good. I'm not going to put him in amazing though. I think he was just pretty good. I think Coolidge was a pretty good president. Okay, Herbert Hoover. Yeah, Hoover, you're going in terrible, man. You're just a horrible president. I almost want to put him in worst of the worst, but we're not going to. So start off with the Great Depression. Is he the reason for the Great Depression? Not really. Okay, that's something that built up over the 1920s. And it starts at the beginning of Hoover's presidency, and so it's hard to say that it was all his fault, because it wasn't. But he did nothing to help the people in America during the time. He believed in zero. He had like zero government intervention during the time. He believed the situation would just solve itself, which is a horrible belief system. He was horrible, and the policies that he did enact were actually counteractive. They were harmful. They were ineffective. He was just not a good president. He was terrible. He was not what this country needed. So he's going in terrible. Following him is FDR. I love FDR so much. So he's going in amazing. Why is he not in creme de la creme, you ask? I'm going to get into that in a little bit. So first of all, the New Deal. Let's talk about the New Deal. So Public Works Acts, Civilian Conservation Corps, Tennessee Valley Authority. He provided millions of jobs and infrastructure development. A lot of the roads and bridges today were built under his administration. to create jobs. The belief at the time was that by the government spending money, you stimulate economic growth over time, and that's actually been proven true. Some people today, revisionist people, claim that he extended the Great Depression quite a bit, that he wasn't as quick as he should have been. Um, but what he did worked, and I'm going to give him credit for that. I think FDR was actually a really, really good president during the Great Depression. Not to even mention World War II. You know, you want to say that he was a bad leader during the Great Depression, fine, but he was an amazing leader during World War II. Okay, um, yes, let's acknowledge the Japanese internment camps. Like 100,000 Japanese people were encamped in concentration camps because they were considered to be possible spies, which is horrible. That's also one of the reasons why I don't have him in creme de la creme. He doesn't break that because the other presidents that I made, Washington and Lincoln, that I just don't know if he's up there. I don't want to butt heads with anybody. But I feel like FDR was really good, right? Truman is next. So, president at the end of World War II, his leadership was good. I am a I am a fan of his usage of the atomic bombs. I do feel like that was necessary. An invasion of Japan would have costed somewhere around 500,000 American lives, and in process he did, you know, destroy Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But the loss of life would have been much greater if he hadn't done so. And so I am an advocate for the use of the atomic bombs. Um, so after World War II, the Truman Doctrine, which was pretty much condemning communism, the Marshall Plan, which sent billions of dollars of aid to Western Europe, formation of NATO, all these things are really good until the Korean War, which he gets us in. And it's this brutal conflict that lasts 3 years, hundreds of like it was horrible for the U.S. And it really hurt his reputation. But he did desegregate the military, and he did ban discrimination in federal service. I also will give him credit. He transitioned our economy from a wartime one to a peacetime one, which is a big feat that a lot of people don't really recognize. So Truman gets to go in good. I think Truman was a good. I think he was actually a pretty good president. I think he gets a lot of slack for Korea, which is, it's valid, but I'm gonna put him in good. I'm gonna put him in good. Eisenhower. I love Eisenhower. Eisenhower was a great president, in my opinion. I think he was a pretty good president. So he maintained peace. He oversaw the end of the Korean War. He signed the Civil Rights Act of 1957. You also have the Little Rock, Kansas incident where he actually sent federal troops to make sure that Little Rock, Kansas the high school was desegregated, which was amazing. I don't know a lot of other people that would have done that at the time. He created NASA. He expanded Social Security, the interstate highway system, the postal code system. That being said, though, military-industrial complex, or at least the idea of it, begins under Eisenhower, and that only expands over time, and it does cause problems for us later. But I'm gonna give him credit where credit's due. He was pretty good. Okay. Next is Kennedy. So Kennedy gets romanticized a lot in modern history because of the way that he died and how young he was when he died and how he died. Um, I honestly, I think he was a just all right president in my opinion. Um, he wasn't mid by any means, but I'm gonna put him at the top of this though. I'm to be honest with you. Um, so what's the deal with Kennedy, right? Why do I have him? I don't want to cause. Okay. So first of all, the Bay of Pigs, which was terrible, right? He should not. That was a terrible decision on his behalf. Um, but you have the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is widely considered to be one of the greatest points in American history. The 12 greatest days in American history. He was amazing. Uh, he created the Peace Corps, the space race, which he won, which was a great great for America. He stimulated massive economic growth in the early 1960s with lots of tax cuts for the average person. Um, but big downside, he did escalate the conflict in Vietnam, which under his administration wasn't as bad as it would later become. But um, a lot of the blame does fall on Kennedy for getting us involved in Vietnam, um, or at least escalating the conflict. So Kennedy goes in just all right for me personally, but he's no means a bad president. LBJ is next. So LBJ is a pretty good president in my opinion. I think he gets a lot of slack for quite a few things. Um, so the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 elevate him to a status above a lot of other presidents. Okay, those were things that needed to happen, and he knew they needed to happen, and he got it done. He established Medicaid and Medicare, the Great Society programs, which tried eliminating poverty and racial injustice. Now, his expansion of the welfare state is controversial, and I do agree that it was a little too grand. I feel like it has led to problems today, but I think it's way overblown. Okay, maybe the welfare state was bloated. Maybe the Great Society was too much of an undertaking. But there's no dispute that it actually helped, because at the time a lot of these policies were necessary, and you can't look at it from a point of you can't look at it from hindsight, right? Then again, though, gotta mention Vietnam. He significantly escalated Vietnam. Our time of greatest involvement was under LBJ, and it's hard to defend him when it was very obviously not the right thing to do. Even at the time, I have a hard time believing that it was truly seen as the correct thing to do at the time. People never wanted a war in Vietnam. People were protesting. It was bad. So he's just going to stay in pretty good. In fact, he might even go in good, but I'm going to keep him there for now. I don't know. Vietnam was bad. It was very bad. But we'll keep him there. Okay, so next is Nixon. So Nixon is very controversial. I think Nixon was mid, in my opinion. So he opened up China, right, which at the time I feel like it was necessary. I know a lot of conservatives today like to blame him for allowing China to become a superpower and rival the U.S. or whatever, but I feel like that was going to happen without our involvement. And China has in a lot of ways benefited the U.S. economically. So to say that it was one-sided is completely ignorant, right? So I think it was okay for the time. You have the SALT Agreement, the Clean Air Act, the creation of the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. He did end Vietnam, but there was a Watergate scandal, and that scandal alone caused so much distrust within the executive branch that a lot of people started to lose confidence in the president. That has great implications even today, right? I don't think Nixon was I think Nixon could have done more, all right? And I think he was cut off short by his own, shortcomings. So he goes off in mid, but he's not terrible. So after Nixon is his vice president, Ford, who, he's not a very good president. He's actually pretty bad. He didn't really do a whole lot, though, to be honest with you. The first thing he did was pardon Nixon, which is one of the most controversial things in presidential history, because it was very clearly a corruption thing. Ford had high inflation and unemployment during his presidency. He didn't do much to counter it. He was a pretty stale and content president. And he did continue our policy of detente with Soviet Union, which I do think was good. I think his foreign policy wasn't horrible, which, elevates him a little bit, but he just wasn't a good president. So let's go with Carter. People love to bash on Carter because, they like to say that he was a nothing president that didn't do anything for our country, and he actually reversed a lot of the things that were good about the U.S. But I think as we've gone on, Carter has actually become a better president in the hearts and minds of many. So he inherited a bad economy, right? The bad economy was not just because of Carter, right? The economy came from mismanagement under Nixon and a content with the status quo from Ford. So Carter really couldn't do anything at the start, right? Um, he was a moralist person, right? He had moralistic ideals, and he always tried to implement methods that aligned with his idea of moralism, right? And that clashed with Congress a lot because Congress was traditionalist, and he was uh, a good. He was too good of a human being for president, in my opinion, if that makes sense. His foreign policy though was terrible. His handling of the Iranian hostage crisis was just bad. Um, so on the world stage, the U.S. looked like like it didn't. We didn't look powerful at all under Carter. Um, he did establish. He was a very big advocate of the environmental protection. He created the Department of Energy and the Department of Education. He was very human rights focused, if you will. Um, but I think that his foreign policy was bad, and I don't think his policies were as effective as they could have been. So, um, he's gonna go in mid for me. He might even go in bad. Nah, he's gonna go in mid. Okay, I don't think he was as bad as people say he was. To be honest with you. Okay, next we have Reagan. Yeah, this is controversial. He was definitely controversial. Reagan is like the right's FDR, right? FDR is for the left, and Reagan is for the right. Um, so, oh, under Reagan, we see a massive deregulation of pretty much everything, right? He stimulated a lot of economic growth and he did create a lot of jobs. He had great foreign policy and he did build up the military considerably, but at the cost of a great increased national debt, which this is something that we see under every president, right? Every president has an increase of national debt, almost every president, but his was significant, right? Income inequality that was greater. It was a massive income inequality. Massive cuts to welfare, often sided with corporations, disregarded the environment, and we're seeing a lot of repercussions with Reagan's system of government today. Uh, he was the war on drugs. Like Reagan, I don't think was a very good president. I think Reagan was pretty bad. It wasn't terrible. There were things about his presidency that were good, but it's a short term thing. It was good in the short term, but in the long term it was bad. And even then, they should have known that the things they were doing were going to have an impact on the future. They were just completely ignorant with a lot of what they did, or a lot of what Reagan did. So Reagan just goes in bad, in my opinion. I don't think he's anywhere near up here. He might max. He goes in just all right. But I've seen people put him as, one of the best presidents of all time, and that's just not true. That is just not true. I will say this, though. I'm going to replace Carter with Reagan. Because he was more effective as a president. There's no way Carter was a better president than Reagan was. So yeah, that's probably what I'm gonna do with that. Okay, after Reagan is George H.W. Bush. He definitely was better than Reagan. Americans with Disabilities Act, the Immigration Act, Clean Air Amendments. That being said, though, there was a hefty recession towards the late 90s. He did get us involved in the Gulf War, and we did invade Panama. I'm of the belief that both the Gulf War and Panama were necessary involvements. I don't hold those against him. I don't think he was a good president domestically speaking. I think he was actually pretty bad. And I'm going to just put him in mid. That's probably where he belongs. Okay. After HW is Clinton. So Clinton sees a lot of significant economic growth under his presidency, right? But there's also a lot of partisan divisions, right? Under Clinton, we have the NAFTA agreement, the crime bill. He's the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act. He did deregulate the financial industry quite a bit, and he also intervened in Bosnia and Kosovo while expanding NATO. I don't necessarily think he was that bad of a president. I think people like to, hate on Clinton, and they dislike him because of his personal issues, like the scandal. That's not really something I care about too much. I think it's held against him a lot. But I think Clinton was just he was just all right, okay? He was just all right. And then finally we have George W. Bush. George W. Bush was not good. I don't think he was a very good president. I think he was actually a pretty bad president. Um, we have the War on Terror, the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, involvement in both of those. The Patriot Act, which is horrible, expanding surveillance on everyone in the U.S. He did expand Medicare, though, right? No Child Left Behind, which was bad. He did not handle Katrina as good as he could have. And I don't, there are obligations of the things that, he was partaking in Iraq that he knew of, the drone strikes, the torture, all that stuff. I'm not going to hold it again. I'm going to take some points away because at the time, obviously, that's terrible. Why would you do that? But you know what? He's going to be here. And then finally, we have Obama and Trump. Their presidencies were not that long ago, and Trump is currently in office right now, so I can't really rank him. For food for thought, though, if I was to rank Obama, he would probably be in mid. Not really a big fan of his presidency. Later, if I do a tier list again of the presidents, a revised one, I might rank Obama, and I'll explain why. I think the worst shortcoming of Obama's administration is the Syrian civil war and how he handled that. The drone strikes, oh my god, he was evil in that conflict, and there were a lot of things that he just didn't handle well. And then Trump, based off of Trump's first administration, I would have put him in mid or bad. But his second administration, bro, he's actually just crazy. I would put him in terrible, honestly. He's going in terrible. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But maybe, you know what? Next 2 years, he might discover the cure for cancer. He might distribute that throughout the entirety of the world for free. Who knows? Maybe he will. Maybe he won't. There's no way to tell the future, so I just can't rank them at the moment. But yeah, this is the list as far. Wait, I'm gonna switch it. I'm gonna rank them each category best to worst. So I'll be back in a second. All right, I'm back. So this is the revised tier list. I've ranked them in order. I've moved some people around, like John Adams. I actually moved down a little, or actually moved up from mid. I moved Reagan down to bad, among some others. But this is my official list. I do think Lincoln is the best president. And then I think the worst president is probably Johnson. I think these 5 right here are interchangeable. I think these are the bottom 5, in my opinion. You can make an argument for any of them being the worst, but I think Johnson is probably the worst, in my opinion, obviously. But yeah, this is the finalized tier list. Thanks so much for watching. I had a lot of fun making this video. I am very passionate about this. If you have anything to say, leave it down in the comments. Corrections. Please let me know if I said something that wasn't true or perhaps not wrong. I'm not a historian, right? I don't claim to be. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, obviously. I encourage you to do your own research and make your own tier list, maybe. Maybe tell me how you would rank the presidents. Change up my tier list. So, anyway, thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed the video, or the like button. Hit that notification bell if you want to hear or see when I upload more videos. Yeah, have a great day, guys.